Ethan Hart arrived in the quiet town of Willowbridge with the hope of resting his mind. Life in Seattle had worn him down. Too many deadlines, too many expectations, too much noise. He told himself this trip was only about helping his best friend, Daniel Pierce, who had been going through a heavy year. Daniel needed support, and Ethan wanted to be the kind of friend who showed up when it mattered. He imagined a few peaceful months, simple routines, calm evenings, maybe even a chance to breathe for the first time in a long while. But Willowbridge had a surprise waiting for him. Her name was Charlotte Pierce. Ethan remembered her from their teenage years. Daniel's younger sister who always hovered around the edges of their friendships, smiling politely, speaking softly, avoiding trouble. Back then, she was the girl with messy braids, oversized hoodie sleeves, the laugh that always arrived a second too late. As if she needed permission to let herself be happy. He thought she would be the same. But then she walked into the room on his first night in the Pierce family home. And Ethan's world quietly changed direction. Charlotte wasn't the shy girl he remembered. She was a woman, now calm, warm, delicate, in a way that made people lean closer just to hear her. Her long brown hair fell around her shoulders, her sweater looked soft enough to sleep in, and her eyes carried a kind of gentle sadness that hit him harder than he expected. She stopped in the doorway, holding a cup of tea, and offered him a smile that felt like a small light turning on in a dark room. "Ethan," she said softly, "it's been a long time." Ethan nodded, trying to ignore the strange tightness forming in his chest. "Yeah, too long." Daniel clapped him on the shoulder, unaware of the invisible spark that had just leaped between them. "My sister's cooking tonight," he said proudly. "You're lucky. She's gotten better." Charlotte rolled her eyes, smiling in a way that made Ethan feel something warm and familiar. "Ignore him. He just says that so he doesn't have to cook." Ethan laughed, but his laughter felt uneven. She was Daniel's sister, completely off limits. Daniel had said it years ago, more as a playful warning than a strict rule. But Ethan had never forgotten. "Don't even think about it," Daniel had told him when they were 18 and stupid. "She's like family to me, Ethan, and to you." So Ethan never thought about it. Not then. Not seriously, but that night as Charlotte moved around the kitchen, humming softly, brushing her hair behind her ear, checking a pot on the stove, and found himself watching her in a way that startled him. Something in her presence tugged at him. It's the same way a melody sneaks into a person's mind without asking permission. He told himself it was nothing. Just nostalgia. Just respect. Just noticing someone he hadn't seen in years. But as the first week went by, nothing began turning into something. It started with small moments. Moments he didn't expect. He found Charlotte on the back porch one morning, sipping her coffee while watching the lake shimmer under the early sun. She greeted him with that soft smile, and suddenly Ethan found himself opening up about how burnt out he felt in the city. She listened with a quiet focus he rarely experienced, nodding slowly, offering simple but thoughtful words. On another evening, while Daniel ran an errand, Ethan found Charlotte reading in the living room, curled in a corner of the couch with a blanket over her knees. She invited him to sit with her, and they ended up talking about everything from childhood dreams to the mistakes they both wished they could undo. Her voice was soothing, her eyes warm. And Ethan realized she wasn't just Daniel's little sister anymore. She was her own person. Full of depth and quiet resilience, he tried to ignore his feelings. But they kept growing. He noticed the small things first. How gently she spoke. How patiently she listened. How she carried a kind of sadness that made him want to protect her, even though he had no right. Then one night it all came crashing closer. It was raining softly as steady. Calm rain that felt like a heartbeat in the background. The three of them had spent the earlier evening watching an old movie. But Daniel fell asleep halfway through, exhausted from a long day. Charlotte lowered the volume, and Ethan sat beside her on the couch, not touching, but too aware of the space between them. The rain, the dim light, the quiet breathing of the house, everything drew them closer in a way Ethan couldn't explain. "You ever feel like life is moving without you?" Charlotte asked suddenly. Like everyone else is figuring things out and you're just stuck. Ethan looked at her, surprised by the vulnerability in her voice. Yeah, he answered honestly. More than you know. She nodded slowly, staring at her hands. I think I stopped trusting people a long time ago, she whispered. Everyone I cared about. They didn't stay. Her voice tightened slightly, not enough to break, but enough to reveal a wound she didn't show often. Ethan wanted to say something comforting, but his throat tightened. He wanted to tell her he wasn't like them. He wanted to tell her he wouldn't leave, but he couldn't say that, because he wasn't supposed to want her at all before either of them could speak again. Daniel stirred awake and sat up, yawning loudly. The tension in the room vanished instantly, like a flame snuffed out by cold wind. Charlotte stood murmuring something about checking the laundry. And Ethan felt the moment slip away. The next morning, he tried to avoid her. He made his coffee early, left the house for a long walk around the lake, stayed out until lunch. He told himself distance was the right thing. He reminded himself of Daniel's rule, of the loyalty he owed his friend, of the trouble that could follow if he let his feelings grow. But every time he tried to pull away, something gently pulled him back. Like the evening Charlotte stopped by the porch to hand him a cup of hot cocoa, saying, "You looked cold out there today." Or the time she laughed at one of his stories in a way that made him feel lighter, like the world wasn't pressing so hard on his shoulders. Or the day she quietly admitted she felt lonely too. Even though she was surrounded by people, Ethan realized he wasn't just attracted to her. He felt for her deeply, unexpectedly, dangerously. It wasn't a sudden spark anymore, it was something slower. Something warmer, something that kept circling back no matter how far he walked from it. One night, while Daniel was upstairs taking a call, Charlotte and Ethan found themselves alone in the kitchen. She was drying dishes. He was stacking them away. Simple actions, ordinary tasks, yet the air felt heavy with unspoken questions. "Ethan," Charlotte said quietly, not looking at him, "you've been acting different." He froze, heart pounding, hands stiff around a plate. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to sound casual. She set the towel down and finally faced him. "You avoid looking at me, and when you do, you look like you're trying not to think something." He swallowed hard. "Charlotte, it's complicated." She nodded slowly. "I know." There was a long pause. A soft, fragile pause. The kind of pause that holds a truth neither person is brave enough to touch. Then, almost as if she didn't mean to say it out loud, Charlotte whispered, "You're not the only one feeling something." The plate nearly slipped from Ethan's hand. Before he could respond, Daniel called from upstairs. "Ethan, need your help with something?" Ethan stepped back as if distance might erase the moment he wasn't supposed to have. Charlotte lowered her gaze, her cheeks slightly flushed, and walked away quietly. Ethan stood there alone in the kitchen. Heart shaking, mind spinning. Everything inside him screamed to turn around, to go after her, to tell her he felt the same. But the rule echoed in his mind, loud and unforgiving. Daniel's sister is off limits. Don't even think about it, except Ethan had already crossed that line in his heart. Every day with Charlotte made that line blur, soften, fade. Every smile she gave him pulled him closer. Every quiet conversation tied him to her more deeply. He came to Willowbridge for peace. Instead, he found something he wasn't prepared for, something tender, dangerous, and impossibly hard to walk away from. And Charlotte. She was starting to look at him like she already knew. He didn't plan to fall for her. He didn't even want to. But love, even forbidden love, had a way of showing up exactly when it shouldn't. And the worst part? Ethan didn't know if he had the strength to resist it anymore. Ethan had tried to pull away, to convince himself that distance was the only way. He had spent days walking the lake, jogging through quiet streets, and staying out until the golden sun dipped behind the hills. He told himself repeatedly that Charlotte was Daniel's sister, that the rule was clear, that he owed his loyalty to his best friend. And yet, no matter how far he ran, no matter how many tasks he buried himself in, the thought of her lingered in every quiet moment. Every laugh, every glance, every little smile played on repeat in his mind. Charlotte had noticed it too. She was careful around him, but there were moments when she let herself see him not as her brother's friend, not as a safe adult acquaintance, but as Ethan, the man who understood her in ways nobody else seemed to. She caught his gaze lingering when he thought she wasn't looking. She noticed the way he hesitated before leaving a room, as if the air between them held more weight than it should. And sometimes, in those brief seconds, when words failed, she felt the pull herself. It was on one late evening, just as the sky was turning navy, that their tension reached its tipping point. Daniel had gone out for a long meeting downtown, leaving the house quiet except for the soft hum of the heater. Ethan was in the living room trying to read a book. But his focus drifted instantly when Charlotte entered, carrying a mug of tea. She moved with her usual gentle grace, her eyes meeting his briefly, and in that instant, the years of restraint began to crack. She sat down beside him on the couch, careful not to touch, careful to maintain the invisible barrier. And Ethan felt that barrier shatter in his chest. The closeness, even without contact, was too much. His heartbeat quickened, and the words he had tried so hard to suppress threatened to escape. "Ethan," she said softly, voice almost a whisper, "why is it so hard to ignore you lately?" He swallowed, trying to calm the sudden rush of heat in his face. "Charlotte, he stopped. There was no easy way to say the truth. Not when the truth could ruin everything. I'm just trying to respect boundaries." She tilted her head, looking at him with a mix of sadness and hope. Boundaries, right? That's what keeps people apart, isn't it? Ethan wanted to reach out and brush a strand of hair from her face, but he couldn't. He stayed still, silent, knowing that even one touch would break the line completely. Yet inside, a storm raged. He couldn't deny it any longer. He cared about her deeply, recklessly, in ways that were both thrilling and terrifying. Charlotte's eyes softened, and she leaned back slightly, letting the silence stretch between them. The tension wasn't uncomfortable, which is alive, charged, real. Ethan realized that the attraction they both felt wasn't something he could ignore. It had grown quietly, steadily, like a plant breaking through the cracks of a stone floor. It had been there all along, unnoticed until now. Finally, he spoke, voice low and careful. "Charlotte, I didn't plan for this. I didn't want to feel this way. But I can't. I can't stop myself." She looked at him, and for the first time, Ethan saw a mixture of relief and fear. Relief that she might feel the same, and fear of what it meant. "Ethan, what happens now?" she asked, voice barely audible, like she feared the answer. Before he could respond, the front door opened. Daniel returned earlier than expected. Ethan's chest tightened immediately. He knew this was the moment of truth, the moment where everything he had tried to contain could come to light. Daniel's presence reminded him again of the line he shouldn't cross, the rule he had tried so hard to obey. Yet, when he glanced at Charlotte, he knew that resisting was no longer possible. Not for either of them. Daniel called from the hallway, his tone neutral but firm. "Ethan, can we talk?" Ethan took a deep breath. Charlotte looked at him, her eyes wide, lips slightly parted. The unspoken question hung in the air. Should they run? Pretend nothing had happened? Or face the truth together, knowing the risk? He nodded once, standing slowly. "Yeah, let's talk." Daniel motioned for them to follow him into the kitchen. His expression was calm, but Ethan could see the tension in his jaw. Daniel's hands were clasped together, knuckles white. "Ethan," he said quietly, "I've known you for years. You've been like a brother to me, and I've always trusted you. But this, whatever's happening here, it can't hurt my sister. You need to understand that." Ethan swallowed hard, trying to steady his voice. "I know, Daniel. I care about Charlotte. More than I planned. More than I should." Daniel ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. "I can't stop what you feel. I can't control your heart. But I can't let anyone hurt her either. You need to be honest with her, with me, and with yourself." Charlotte stepped forward slightly, her voice soft but firm. Daniel, I'm not a child. I know what I feel, and I care about him too. Daniel's eyes shifted between them, reading the unspoken bond that had formed. The years of tension and longing that neither of them had allowed themselves to acknowledge. He leaned back against the counter, taking a deep breath. This isn't easy, he admitted, for any of us. But maybe what matters most is that you both know your hearts. That's all I ask. Ethan felt a wave of relief mixed with fear. Relief that Daniel wasn't angry, fear that everything could still go wrong. He looked at Charlotte, whose eyes shone with unshed tears. He wanted to reach for her, to hold her hands, to tell her that he wouldn't run away, that he wouldn't leave her alone again. Finally, he did. Slowly, he reached out, and Charlotte's hands met his. There was no rush, no dramatic gesture, just a quiet, tender connection that said more than words could. Her fingers intertwined with his, and in that small touch, the tension that had been building for weeks began to melt. They sat together on the porch later, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars emerge in the night sky. The lake reflected the moonlight, soft and still. Ethan could feel Charlotte's warmth beside him, and he realized that every fear he had, every worry about rules, boundaries, consequences was worth facing if it meant being near her. He didn't need promises yet. He didn't need certainty. He only needed this moment, this quiet connection, this shared understanding. Charlotte leaned her head slightly toward him, and he felt the subtle brush of her hair against his shoulder. Do you ever wonder, she whispered, what life would have been like if we hadn't waited? If we hadn't held back? Ethan shook his head softly. I don't think I can wonder anymore, he said, because I don't want to go back. I want to move forward. With you. She smiled faintly, a mixture of happiness and nerves. With me. She repeated, Are you sure? He nodded, a steady certainty in his voice. Yes, I don't know what the future holds or how hard it will be, but I know I don't want to ignore what I feel. Not anymore. The night stretched around them, quiet except for the distant sound of water lapping against the dock. They talked about small things first, the kind of stories that filled the spaces between heartbeats. Then they talked about dreams, hopes, fears, and heartbreaks. Every word built a bridge between them. A bridge that wasn't forbidden or risky, it was real and alive. Ethan realized he was falling for her completely. Not just her beauty, but her strength, her gentleness. The way she carried herself and the way she made him feel understood without needing to explain everything. Charlotte realized the same about him, the way he listened, the care he showed, and the steady presence he provided in her life. Days turned into weeks, and their bond grew stronger. Tested quietly by the eyes of the world, but untouched in the sanctuary of Willowbridge. Daniel was careful, watching, but never intrusive. He allowed them space to explore the emotions they had kept secret for so long. Ethan and Charlotte learned to communicate without words, sharing glances, small touches, and private smiles. They discovered a rhythm together, one that was gentle, mature, an unhurried rhythm that spoke of respect, patience, and deep emotional connection. And even though they knew the path was fragile, uncertain, and filled with potential heartbreak, they didn't let fear dictate their choices. They had waited too long, cared too deeply, and discovered a connection that refused to be ignored. One evening, after a long walk along the lakeshore, Charlotte stopped and turned to Ethan. Do you think we can do this? She asked, voice trembling slightly. Ethan took both her hands in his. I don't know what the future holds, he admitted honestly. But I know this we can try together, and I won't let go. Not unless you want me to. She smiled through tears, leaning her forehead against his. I don't want you to, she whispered. And in that moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. There were no rules, no judgments, no fears, only the quiet understanding that two hearts, once restrained, had found each other. Ethan held her closer, feeling the steady rhythm of her breath, the warmth of her presence, the quiet strength she radiated. And Charlotte, for the first time in a long while, felt a calm she hadn't known she could have, the feeling of being seen, being cared for. and being allowed to love without shame or hesitation. The night air was cool, the stars bright, and for the first time, both of them felt that love wasn't just a risk, it was a choice they were willing to make. No one could predict what the days ahead would bring, but they had this moment, this connection. And that was enough. And as they stood together on the porch, hands intertwined, hearts aligned, they knew one thing for certain: some people are off limits until the heart decides otherwise. And once that decision is made,